So warm applause for Apollo. He managed to get the visa and fly in the last time. So Apollo is going to tell you, give you a little bit of a deeper insight on what's happening in Africa and his view and his opinions on how the whole market is going to evolve and where is the blockchain part of this, and where is eternity fitting in all of this. So thank you very much for joining us, Apollo. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be in Prague. For the first time, I'm meeting very many people that I've only met online. My name is Apollo, and I run Entrepreneurs Hub. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the continent of Africa. We have been in operation for the last 1 year or 1.5 years since we started doing what we're doing with Eternity Hub Africa. And our core operation or objective for existence is to promote the adoption of blockchain technology through education. And right now we are also building a few use cases here and there, because we realize that just going out there and talking to people and not really showing them something that works. I mean, it's always easy to point fingers at Utu or RideSafe because they're in Nairobi, but sometimes you also need to show exactly what you're doing. So we also decided that part of that development of training entrepreneurs, we must also be able to develop some in-house solutions here and there. So I'm going to give you just a broad overview of what's currently happening in Africa, some of the trends that are emerging, and also what I think is going to happen in the next few years or so. So I'm not sure how this works, but yeah. I think we're at a point in this technology where there is a lot of traction starting to be gained all over the world, and Africa is not getting left behind. There's quite a lot that is happening, and as that exponential growth takes place, I believe we are going to plug in just at the right time. It's also very difficult to predict exactly how the technology is going to evolve across the continent, because one thing that you all know and agree with is that technology never moves or evolves in one straight direction. I think it's going to take a life of its own. But one thing that we cannot ignore is the fact that the changes and the paradigm shift that blockchain technology is bringing is going to affect so many areas, some of which we cannot even begin to think or imagine at this particular level because of the limited constraints we have in trying to understand this technology and what it can be able to do. When people see Africa or think about it, some of the things that comes to mind are things like a continent that is struck completely by poverty, a continent where political leaders are, eating all money which is meant for development fund. It's a continent where political instability just makes it almost impossible to do business or just create confidence in people who want to invest from other developed world where there's a lot of capital. There are also people who sympathize with the continent, and they're very optimistic. They have a very optimistic view. They say that Africa is a continent on the rise. I agree to some extent, and to some extent I also do not agree. Because if Africa as a continent is on the rise, that's a very simplistic observation based on the fact that a few countries in Africa are growing at an annualized rate of, say, 6-7%, and that they normally compare with the sluggish growth that is, taking place in the developed world after the financial crisis, which sometimes goes up to only 2%. They also compare that to the rising story of China, say 20 years ago, when China had like 1 billion people, and it was rising at the rate of, say, 18%. So as an African who is also a very proud person, I think one of the things that we must ask ourselves is what standards do we accept for Africa? Because if 6-7% is how Africa is growing, and all of these economies that are growing at 6-7% are actually commodity driven. So they're exporting oil or probably exporting some cocoa or coffee. And that is what the development growth is based on. So the question then becomes, are we accepting a different standard for the continent of Africa? And the standard we will be accepting if 6% is rising compared to China 18 years ago when it was riding at 18%, then I think that's a mediocre standard, and we should not accept it as Africans because we can do much, much more. Moving forward, this continent, I can give you 3 examples that I want to talk about. Let's take energy, for instance, because I don't think in the 21st century any country can have meaningful development without necessarily being energy secure. Across the border in France, France produces around, I think, 20 times electricity, energy, compared to all the 45 sub-Saharan countries. What that really means in actual sense is that each French person consumes 50 times more energy than an African annually. So the question is, how can a continent be developing when you're operating at such a disadvantage? I can give you another example, the way we manage our economic resources. A country like Nigeria, for example, which is dependent on oil for a very long time as commodity of export, I think they lost up to the tune of 150 million barrels of oil through corruption, theft, and just mismanagement of these economic resources. That is the same amount which they will probably need to import wheat and other cereals. And during that period of time, people will not die from hunger. We can go on and on with examples in technology, infrastructure development. For example, it costs $30 to ship a ton of fertilizer from a port in the US to a port in Mombasa in Kenya. $30. But to transport the same amount of fertilizer from a port in Mombasa across Kenya to Uganda into the capital city of Rwanda, which is like 1,500 kilometers, it will cost you roughly $150. It means you're paying like 30 times more to transport goods and services across the continent of Africa. I do not think that you're a rising continent as long as you're still dealing with these kinds of challenges. And it doesn't mean that Africa is dead or it cannot rise or it will not rise. I think it will rise. What we need to do as entrepreneurs, as change makers, as optimistic people who want to see the change is to get realistic. And getting realistic means that we must stop confusing hope for achievement and also hype for reality. We just need to get down to business and actually develop solutions and systems that can actually solve this problem. If you ask me what really the biggest potential I see in blockchain is in the continent of Africa, I think is in shared economy. So if you look at simple applications like Airbnb and how they are disrupting traditional models such as hospitality and the hotel industry and taking away business from them. In the information industry, you can talk about Google, Facebook, and even in advertisements. You could talk about in the mobility sector, Maramoja in Nairobi. You can talk about Uber and how they've taken business from traditional taxi operators. I think that what happens, which was said here in the morning by Luca, is that these are examples of where we are going to go as a people. That is how the future looks like. It's an emerging digital economy that we cannot kind of run away from or hide from. So what we must do is just find a way to be really, really a part of it. And I think that very soon we are going to see alternatives which are inspired by blockchain technology taking over from these ones that we see to be very, very cool right now, which is Uber, Maramoja. You need to evolve Maramoja to a level where it's a completely decentralized system and people are sharing in the economy. Because if we build a truly shared economy, it means that we put the tools of decentralizing wealth and distributing it in the hands of the people. I believe that a decentralized economy is an economy where producers and consumers are more or less the same people. So they put quality in what they're doing because they are part of the consumers of the product that they are actually producing. And when we are able to decentralize the process of creating and distributing wealth, then I think that holds the key to bridging the gap between the very, very poor people and the very rich. Because once you bridge that gap, then problems like anger, like corruption, which is just because people have been born in poverty and they think that when you get a small opportunity, you amass as much wealth as you can through corruption, and then you're better off. I think those are problems which can be solved by blockchain technology. So, what is the greatest potential that Africa as a continent has? I think that the potential that we have as a continent is in its people. Africa has the highest number of young, energetic people. They're very curious about technology. They're enthusiastic about embracing it. And they fearlessly use new technology. I think we are having a mobile phone penetration rate of 80 to 90%, and in most cities across the continent. Yeah, I've not been doing that a lot. I don't know how far I've been able to go. But yeah. So Luca lost me completely. What was I saying? Please. Yeah, people, biggest asset in Africa. So Luca, don't do that again because you lose me. Yeah. So I think these young people, they're also very, very educated. They want solutions because they're tired of how things are not working, and they want to get things moving in and going. That is one of the biggest assets. I think every country that needs to develop must have a people who, want that change, because it doesn't happen from up down. It happens from the people going up. The other advantage, I think, not an advantage, but the science. How can we tell that actually we are going to achieve a decentralized economy in Africa? Because if that is how we distribute, how we create and distribute wealth, then are there even signs that we are headed in that direction? I think there are. And in Africa, there are movements which are springing up out of necessity. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. There's a slum in Kenya, at the coastal region called Bangladesh. Bangladesh and many other slums in Nairobi as well. People live mostly under the poverty line, so they cannot spend more than $2 a day on necessary stuff like food, transport, and even shelter. Normally what happens in such an economy is there is a time of the month when there is a lot of boom and very, very high spending power. And then there's a time when people do not have money to buy or for any service. Because when they get their salaries, it is consumed very, very fast in paying all the debt they accumulated when they didn't have money. And then, they also spend it very fast without planning, because most people also do not have a lot of financial literacy in the slum area. So there's a guy called Will. In 2013, he started a movement, community currency called Bangla Pesa. So Bangla Pesa is from the name Bangladesh, which is a slum. So Bangla Pesa. Pesa means money in Swahili. And the real reason why we needed this community currency is that in this ecosystem of the slum, if I am a rider of motorbike, which is the biggest mode of transport in this slum area, and in a day, instead of having like 10 motorbike trips with my clients, I only managed to have 3. It means I might not be able to take care of my daily needs like water, food, and maybe even school fees or lighting for the house. So what happens when I go back home to my family? Yet I went out to work in the morning. My kids want to eat. My wife will ask me, where is the money you left very early in the morning? So this currency would help these people to actually have that purchasing power. They would take this currency, they would go to a shop and be able to buy whatever goods and service that they need And it's a network that people are accepting the currency. So we have, I think, around 100 shops accepting the currency current now. And the function of the currency is that it's an accounting mechanism of reciprocal exchange. So it's a mutual credit system. Because if I'm using this currency called Bangla Pesa, and I go to a shop and I'm able to get unga. Unga is like maize flour for cooking ugali, which is staple food. And I pay, and the shopkeeper is able to accept this community currency. The shopkeeper himself is also in problem because this clientele base do not have a lot of spending power. It means he's not getting as much money as he should be getting. So he is probably having supplies from his suppliers, and he cannot be able to pay for the transport. So he's likely going to call the border guy, the motorbike guy, to be able to transport for him the goods from the supplier to his shop. And in exchange, he will also be able to pay using that same currency. Because in a slum setup like that, most of the time you find that people know each other and they can also be able to trust each other. I think the good thing about this is they've also incorporated a system of guarantors to the currency and community to fund the system and make it more secure and sustainable. This is a grassroots movement that is very, very independent. And the guy who started it, Will, has been out and in of jail because at some point the government accused him of trying to overthrow the government and come in with a new economic system and destabilize the financial sector. Another example that I'm going to talk about is, if you look at the background, that is a Bangla Pesa note. That's like a 50 shillings note. 50 shillings is around 50 cents. And this movement has grown so big from Bangladesh in Mombasa. Right now we have what we call Kangemi Pesa because we have a Kangemi slum in Nairobi. We also have another slum called Gatina. They have Gatina Pesa. And they're able to use these community currencies. The success of M-Pesa is something that I cannot fail to talk about. You all know about how revolutionary this financial fintech solution has been. The success of it, I think, depends on three main things. The culture of sending money at home. Anyone who goes to school and graduates and gets your first job, at least most of the people, you have to send money back at home because you kind of remember where you come from and the people who supported you to get to where you are, so you have to pay that debt. So that culture is very well established and entrenched. I've talked about young people who are educated, embracing new forms of technology. But the most important thing that made M-Pesa work is the infrastructure that has to be put in place. There's what we call agency networks. So agents are like human ATM. It's like a shop. If you go to this shop, you should be able to deposit money in your account and also be able to withdraw money from your account. You should also be able to send money to even someone who is not a registered M-Pesa users. And these, their shops, if you look at the background, that's like an M-Pesa shop. It's not very, very clear. But what I like about the agency network is you can compare it to a blockchain network. The functions of an agent are the ones that I've outlined here. And I'm just trying to compare it to how a blockchain network operates. They all keep ledgers of all the information and transaction taking place within the network. They are distributed. So you can wake up one morning and say that I'm going to open my M-Pesa shop. And tomorrow you can decide to close your shop and no one will ask you any question. They operate largely 24 hours. So these agents network are actually changing the Kenyan economy into a 24-hour economy, which was previously not very, very possible. They validate and they facilitate transactions of all the people who are using this mobile application. And just to wrap this up, like I told you at the beginning, our main objective is to showcase and demonstrate the disruptive potential of blockchain technology across Africa. And that we achieve by having educational programs. So we've been working with two universities, Technical University of Kenya and United States University, to train and have people who have skills, people who can actually build and deploy these applications in real life, so people who can actually come up with solutions. Because I don't think we are going to be able to see or realize the dreams and hopes of blockchain technology unless we have competent developers who can actually write this code. And build that ecosystem of entrepreneurs, developers, and designers alike. We also have use cases, so we've built an exchange for exchange of value. We have a payment platform called BitPal. We've changed the name into BitLipa. It's allowing merchants to accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment. We've also working very, very seriously on a platform that can help SMEs and startups, raise funds through the blockchain. These are test use cases that we're just using to show people that, it's not just theory. It's actually happening, and we can be able to use it to solve problems right now, today. Thank you very much for listening.